All right, everyone. So welcome and good morning to another Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez, application engineer here at KETIV Technologies. So happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully you guys are doing good, staying healthy. You know, maybe some of you guys are starting to go back into the office already. Unfortunately, we're still kind of working from home, trying to figure all of that out. But maybe soon we will probably start going into the office here pretty shortly. So anyways, it's been things. To be honest, I kind of missed doing feedback that you guys were providing on. We do have a webinar on manufacturing updates inside of Fusion 360. So for those of you that don't know, I actually was gone on paternity leave. I was out for approximately 6 to 8 weeks, 7 weeks or so. So in that time being, I want to say there was like 2 updates, if I'm not mistaken. So quite a lot has changed inside of the software. So I did come back to some pretty interesting surprises, things that I'm actually very happy to share with you guys. Again, it's going to be probably a 20-25 minute webinar, so not too long at all. Again, hopefully you guys have a few questions ready for me, and hopefully you guys go back with some new things kind of in your pocket here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Again, manufacturing updates inside of Fusion 360. For those of you, again, that aren't really keeping up with some of the updates, I know, sometimes we get a little bombarded with these updates, which is a good thing, but these are primarily the biggest updates that happen inside of the software this last month, right? So September. So one of the things that did get updated was the flat finishing toolpath. And I know when I first came back and I saw flat finishing, I was like, wait a minute, that's on August, I believe. And just like that, right? They're starting to quickly make updates, make optimizations to this toolpath. So we are going to be talking about kind of the flat finishing toolpath. I know one common question that I've gotten in these last couple of days that I've been back is, well, how does that differentiate from the horizontal toolpath? Right. So we have a flat finishing, for those of you, again, aware of Fusion 360 strategies. The horizontal toolpath is actually a really great toolpath for finding flats on your parts and kind of adding the toolpath, kind of automating that process. So how does that differentiate from this flat finishing toolpath? And that's kind of what I'm going to go into a little bit as well. So we did get some new tools and holders added to the Fusion 360 cam.autodesk library. Again, for those of you that aren't taking advantage of that and are still kind of going through the manual process of creating your tools, take a look at this website. I highly recommend customers take a look at them, users, even if you're a hobbyist, right? You're going to be getting tools from a specific vendor. Chances are that tool is already created for you. So again, take advantage of that. I'll show you guys how to work with the tool libraries, how to download them, and then how to add them to Fusion 360. Now, this is another topic that I'm not going to say it's black magic, but a lot of people are still not too comfortable using it, and completely understandable, right? There are a couple pre-steps that you have to take in order to get this to work. So machine simulation, it's been out on preview mode or beta mode for quite some time now. Again, Autodesk wants to kind of let the users test this out and then bring back some feedback. So again, if you guys are using machine simulation, make sure that you guys are providing that feedback to Autodesk. That way they do get, they're just aware of any bugs, maybe some workflows that aren't really working that well for you. Make sure that they are aware of that. So if you guys are using machine simulation, by all means, feel free to share that feedback. And then last but not least, we're going to start talking about steep and shallow. Again, toolpath that's been inside of Fusion 360 for some time now, a couple months. It did get optimized. And this is, again, another great toolpath if you guys are in the mold making. Maybe you guys are working with some parts that really need some pretty precise tolerances, or maybe some great surface finishes. Steep and shallow is one of those great toolpaths that'll allow you to get there. And again, it's been optimized. I'll kind of show some of the settings that have been added to that toolpath. And then that way you guys are obviously aware of how it works. So let's go ahead and jump into that first option, right? So we're going to be talking about the flat finishing. Again, flat finishing toolpath has been incorporated into Fusion 360 since August. Now, this toolpath, like I said, very similar to the horizontal toolpath, but there are a few differences, I think, that bring it kind of up to light. So if you guys have been using the horizontal toolpath for some time now, one of the biggest things, and I know I've kind of seen this happen, is that if you have holes on your parts, right? So let's say you have a flat and then you have maybe a bore or you have a through hole. If you use that horizontal toolpath, it's going to pick that hole up, right? So it's going to try to machine around the hole. Some way around that is you actually have to patch that hole up, right, using some sort of a surface. But again, that takes a little bit of time, especially if you're not used to maybe using the surface command or not even used to the surface environment. It can bring that down, right? Or it can kind of bring up your programming time. The flat finishing toolpath, where it differentiates, or one of the areas that it differentiates, is that it actually machines over the hole, right? So it kind of ignores that profile and it machines as if it was just a smooth flat surface. Now, the other kind of drastic change that it does is it actually recognizes these open pockets. Right? Again, if you're using the horizontal toolpath, you'll realize that toolpath itself doesn't pick up that it's an open pocket, right? Even though it's an open pocket, it'll see it as a closed pocket, and then it'll try to machine kind of starting on the inside, working its way out. Right? So whereas the flat finishing toolpath, what it does is it does recognize that it's an open pocket, and then it starts machining from the outside of the part. So really, really nice changes. Another thing that it does, again, is that it supports the avoid touch surfaces command. Again, another great functionality that's built into some of the toolpaths inside of Fusion 360 is you do have the option to select a surface that you strictly want to machine or you strictly want to avoid. Horizontal toolpath doesn't have that capability, right? So again, if you've been inside of the horizontal toolpath and you try to look somewhere down in the geometry tab, you will notice that you don't see that little section, right? So the avoid touch surfaces. Flat finishing does have the capabilities to avoid and touch surfaces. So let's go ahead and jump into the software and kind of show this. I am going to be jumping back and forth in between the presentation and the software. So here we have a part, again, nothing too crazy. It's a pretty prismatic part. So what I mean by that, no organic surfaces. If this is, again, your first time inside of Fusion 360, this is exactly what you get, right? And I always want to be careful with this is exactly what you get, because again, in maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever the time frame may be, it might be a little bit different, right? Or if you guys are watching on YouTube, the tool ribbon might have changed a little bit. So again, always just keep an eye out for that. Another thing with Fusion 360 is that you don't really have versions, being that it is a cloud-based software. You won't believe how many times I get, questions asked from customers is, well, what version are you running? We are all on the same version at this point, right? So kind of just keep that in mind, that everyone using Fusion 360 is on the same, essentially on the same version. So this is a part, again, not really an organic part, but it still has a lot of flats, right? It still has a lot of pockets here that you can machine. One of the great strategies that I would take advantage for this part before the flat finishing is the horizontal toolpath, and that is a 3D toolpath, right? And again, one thing that I want to point out is that even though we're not working with an organic surface or an organic part, you can still use 3D toolpaths. And that's one thing that I always like to kind of showcase when we're doing trainings is a lot of people have this misconception of, okay, 3D toolpaths sometimes, or for the most part, are going to be used on surface parts or to do, some sort of surfacing. No, you can actually take advantage of the 3D toolpaths to do some pretty prismatic machining. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and select the horizontal toolpath. My previous tool gets selected, right? So nothing has changed here. Everything here is still as I remember it. Right? So you still have the 5 tabs there. And I'm not going to change anything inside of this horizontal toolpath. I'm actually just going to leave it as it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and press OK. And there's the toolpath, right? So it actually does a pretty good job of finding the flats, right, and applying a toolpath. Now, it might look a little bit different, right? And if you guys are or have been using Fusion 360 for some time now, you guys are probably wondering, well, where are your lead-ins, right? So where are the leads, links? I don't see any of yet. So again, take advantage of the show hides leads and links option, right? So this does clean your interface up a little bit more. Obviously, before posting out, you probably want to see your links to make sure that you're not crashing into your clamps or maybe some sort of work holding that you have. So again, always recommend having that. But as you're trying out some of these toolpaths, sometimes it's nice to just see the cutting passes. Right? So what exactly am I going to be cutting? Where is it going to be cutting into? Right? Kind of cleans this up a little bit. But anyways, going back to what I was saying with the horizontal toolpath, you will notice, right, on this specific pocket, it picks up that there's a hole here, right? And it tries to machine around the hole. It does a really nice job of actually finding the contour here and kind of machining to that contour. So obviously that's great. It kind of offsets the passes. But the one thing that I'm not a big fan of is this hole, right? So again, it might give us a kind of a weird surface finish. In that case, what you would do is then you would probably go to a 2D pocket or maybe a 2D contour, offset the passes, and then get the pass that you're exactly, or the toolpath that you're really looking for, right? So that's one of the things that I don't like about this toolpath. The other thing, if you take a look at this pocket now, take a look at where it's starting, right? So it's kind of leading in, or it's kind of plunging in, ramping in into the center of the pocket, when this whole time it actually can start from the outside and then kind of work its way into the part, right? So those two things are the big differentiators between the horizontal and the flat toolpath. So let's go ahead and bring in the flat toolpath. Again, I can go up here to the very top. If I had settings that I made for the horizontal, I would have to make the same settings for the flat. Instead of doing that, again, always take advantage of the create derived operation. So even as you guys are programming some of your parts, and you guys are kind of trying to figure out which toolpath is best for some of the geometry that I have, take advantage of this, right? So again, make a toolpath, make the changes to that single toolpath, and then try to select another toolpath that you want to test out, right? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use that flat finishing strategy is at the very bottom, right? So again, a lot of people might try to find it up here at the top. It's going to be here at the very bottom. Again, not going to make any changes to it, exactly like I did to the horizontal toolpath. And I'm going to go ahead and press OK. Now, here is one thing that I do want to make sure that you guys are aware of. I don't have a stopwatch, but it was a little obvious that the flat toolpath took a little bit longer to generate than the horizontal toolpath, right? And that's going to be a given. So again, if you have a larger part, just kind of keep that as a consideration on the back of your mind. Reason for that is that the flat is doing way more calculations, right? So it's actually trying to find the flat surfaces, but apart from that, it's trying to see, okay, does that flat surface have a hole? And then can I machine just a smooth profile over that hole, right? Is this pocket an open pocket? If it is an open pocket, can I go ahead and start from the outside of it, right? So it has more functionality, and therefore it is going to take a little bit longer to calculate. So that's one thing that I do want to make sure that you guys are aware of. But anyways, kind of taking a look at the difference between the two, you can already see a huge improvement, right? Obviously, we can probably delete this pass, or we can trim this pass. Maybe we can change the step over here to get kind of a little bit closer pass to the surface. But nonetheless, right off the bat, without changing any settings, we get a really, really nice toolpath, finishing toolpath for some of these open pockets, right? And even the closed pockets up here at the top. So again, definitely take advantage of that flat. To my understanding, it's not something that's in preview, right? So this everyone should have access to that. You don't need to pay for it. Again, I can double check on that, but just taking a look at some of the extensions here, machining, you're not going to see anything on the flat toolpath, right? Unless I missed it. The only one that I do know for a fact that is a part of the extension is going to be that steep and shallow strategy, right? So again, this is accessible to everyone. If you guys are using Fusion 360 and are constantly using the horizontal toolpath, go ahead and give the flat toolpath a go there. All right. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So again, improved toolpath efficiency, short link options actually. So that's that's actually the update that the flat toolpath got. I was just talking about the flat toolpath. So the update that this flat toolpath got, if you go to the linking tab, safe distance, maximum stay down distance, right? This is something that, again, not a lot of customers are really playing too much with, but this essentially, if your tool has a lot of retracts, and maybe it's a pocket, maybe it's a pretty large part, and you know that it doesn't have to retract, or it doesn't have to retract all the way up, and it's going to be safe, you can change the safe distance, right? So you can change the safe distance, you can change the maximum stay down distance. A common question I get is, well, how do I know how large to make that maximum stay down distance? I typically go 2-3 times bigger than the size of the part, right? So if I have a part that's maybe 5 inches, 6 inches, I'll go 18 inches as a maximum stay down distance, right? And what that allows the tool to do is, I mean, granted, it is going to bring up the calculation time a little bit, but it's going to enable it, or it's going to kind of try to force it to stay down instead of retracting all the way up. Now, again, word of caution, when you make that change, you do have to be careful with any sort of fixtures, right? Or clamps or work holding that you have on your part. Because if you don't have them modeled, right, it's going to have that kind of pretty low retract, and you do run the risk of possibly hitting that clamp or the fixture or the work holding that you have. So just be careful with that, right? And that's where I would recommend turning on your links, right? That way you can see exactly where your tool is going to be going, and then see if you have any possible collisions in there. So yeah, so that's the update that they made to the flat finishing. Flat finishing isn't a new toolpath. It came out in August, but the update that they made is that they added the ability for the safe distance and maximum stay down distance. Okay. So the next update that they made, the tool, so they actually made some additions to the tool library and the machine library as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Again, a lot of people don't take advantage of this, and I can kind of see why. There's one of the customers was actually sharing with me the reason why they don't like doing this. So let me go ahead and kind of show you why that reason is. So I'm going to go into that library, bring it up here for you guys. If you've ever had to update a post, maybe look for a post, chances are you're familiar with this website, right? But again, for those of you guys that aren't, this is the website that actually Autodesk has. It's an open source website. What I mean by that is that everything in here is free for you guys. So you can just go ahead and find a post, you can download it, and better yet, you can actually go to the machines tab, find a machine, and download it, right? Download it. So you have all of these different machines available to you. Again, for those of you that aren't aware, machine simulation has been out for some time now. It is still in preview mode, right? So that is one thing that I always like to caution people about too, is if something is in preview mode, you have to make sure that you really pay a little bit more attention to some of the work that you're doing, right? Because again, it's not fully tested. It hasn't been something that Autodesk has completely released yet. So always kind of be a little bit, you just have your senses a little bit more heightened when you're working with preview features. But I have been testing it. Sorry, I have been testing it these the last couple of weeks that I've been back. It's been working great so far. There are a few things, like I said in the beginning, that you do have to kind of set up before you get machine simulation to work. So let me go ahead and kind of go through this, and then we'll show you the machine simulation. But anyways, Autodesk has been working hard in updating this library, right? So again, if you don't see a library here, one of the things that you can do is possibly reach out to them. Or you can actually create your own. There are ways to create your own machine, your machine simulation file as well. If you guys need help with that, we can help out. I'll share my contact info at the end of the webinar. But again, chances are your machine or a very similar version of your machine is going to be found inside of this list, right? So again, you do have 3D models for some of these. I'm not sure if that's an indication that you have a simulation file or simulation model associated with it, but I will show you guys kind of in the machine library where you can see if there's a machine simulation file associated with it. But again, they're constantly updating these. If you don't see the machine simulation, like I said, you can create your own, and I'll kind of show you guys where that's at. So you have the machines, and then up here at the very top, you have the tools as well. So I'll kind of talk about the tools first. How do you bring in a tool library? Again, making huge updates. If I was here maybe last time that I was here was probably a little bit over 6 months, and I remember that they only had a handful of these in the website, right? So now you can actually scroll down and see the different options that they have. So they have Amana tools, they have HOS holders, Tormach tools, IMCO. They have both metric and imperial tools, right? So again, if you have a mix of both, that's completely fine. Now, here is where some customers tend to shy away. So if I take a look at this imperial, you can actually go ahead and view the tools first, right? And they'll look at the list and they're like, well, I really only need 2 tools from this entire list, or maybe I need 5 tools from this entire list, right? If you take a look at kind of how many tools there are, thousands of tools. So it gets a little overwhelming for them. And I do have some ways around this. So what I would recommend is, first off, just go ahead and download the tool library, right? So go ahead and say for Fusion 360, automatically downloads. You don't need a subscription. You don't need to pay for any of this. This is completely free to you guys. So I'm going to go back into Fusion 360. Right, and in the manufacturing tab, or the manufacturing environment, under the manage panel, you do have that tool library option, right? Notice that it's up here at the very top. So again, if you don't see it at the very top and you do want to see it, you do have the option of bringing it up to that toolbar. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the toolbar. This is where obviously your entire tools are going to be residing, right? So you have the document tools. I'm not going to go into this too deeply because we do have other webinars that kind of cover this. But you have your documents tool, you have your cloud tool library, which I 100% always recommend you have this turned on. And then you have your local tool library. What I recommend, and this is again, if you guys only have a handful of tools, what I recommend is having that tool library inside of your local tool library, right? So the one that we just downloaded, finding the tools that you want, and then just adding them to your cloud tool library. Right now, a common question I get is, well, why would we do that? It's really just up to you guys. If you find yourselves maybe using different tools from the IMCO tool library, or whatever tool library you have, then go ahead and add them to the cloud tool library, right? That way you guys just kind of avoid clustering this up. Reason why I bring this up is because, again, if I like to keep this as clean as possible, right? So if I'm working with a customer and I'm setting up their tool library, I always like to keep it organized. So based off of machines, maybe based off of different material types that they're going to be cutting, whatever the case may be, just keep that cloud section of the library organized as much as possible, right? So if you have that IMCO tool library, it can cause confusion. It's just kind of ruins the flow of the cloud section. Some people might see it like that, some people might not. Again, completely up to you guys. But what I sometimes recommend, go into your local tool library, say new library. I'm going to go ahead and call this IMCO tools. And again, we just downloaded that tool library, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, go ahead and import libraries. And again, what we're doing there is we're right-clicking on that local tool library and saying import libraries. Right, we're going to go navigate over to our downloads, find that IMCO, say open. And just like that, we have the entire library selected. Now, here comes the kind of the interesting point, right? So again, you only need 2 or 3 tools. What you can do is you can actually find based off of product ID, right? So if I go in here into the Imperials and I say view, let me see if I can do this relatively quickly. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find, let's go ahead and see if we can find this one. So I saw 2 IDs there, might not be the case. Let me do this one. There it is. So it was just that first ID that I needed, right? So as long as you know the product ID, if you know maybe the description of it, obviously if you know the tool dimensions, that also helps as well. But if you know the product ID, which chances are, typically you have a list kind of different IDs, or maybe the different tools with the product ID, you can go ahead and just insert it here. Now what you can do is you can right click, copy tool, and then bring it into your tool library. Right now, again, some people don't have cloud tool libraries. I highly recommend you change that, right? So why are cloud tool libraries important? If you're working with, let's say you're working at work, for whatever reason, you need to maybe sign into your home computer, you can go ahead and do that, right? So you're going to have access to all of those tool libraries. Now, if it was local, this local tool library only lives on my laptop, right? So that means if I sign in at work and I'm at a desktop at work, I'm not going to have access to any one of these libraries, right? Because these are local to my computer. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head. I thought I read somewhere that this cloud tool library gets enabled by default. I used to know that there was a setting here. So if I go into my preferences, manufacturer, enable cloud libraries, right? So again, I don't know if this gets checked on by default. I know in the past it was something that the user had to check on, but now you have the option to check this on, right? So again, if you don't have this checked on, if you don't have cloud libraries, or if you don't see cloud on your tool library, chances are you just don't have this enabled, right? And this is how you get those out. All right, so that was a quick little spiel on the tool libraries. Again, they've updated the list. Take a look. It wasn't just tools that they modified. They actually also changed the holders, right? So they've updated Haas tooling, Haas holders, right? So this looks like it was one of the ones that they updated. Different tool holders that you can now go ahead and select from. Right, so really neat functionality. Again, instead of doing it manually or spending maybe an hour, 30 minutes, trying to do your holder, just go into the cam.autodesk.com website and see if that holder is available for you guys. All right, so machines. We kind of briefly talked about machines, kind of where they're located. So let's go ahead and kind of show you guys, and I think probably in the future, I'll do a full-on presentation or webinar on how do you work with these machine simulations. So the first thing that I want to go ahead and point out, right? So we have this part open. This part already has toolpaths enabled. I'm going to go ahead and activate that first setup or that first operation. Okay, so how do we add the machine simulation files? Now, this is an option that everyone should have seen probably for the last year and a half, maybe even 2 years. I know I've seen this option every single time I bring up the setup dialog box. I'm going to right click here, say edit. And so again, I right clicked on the setup. This very first section is where you start kind of defining the machine configuration and then the machine setup, right? So again, if you guys have been watching my webinars for a while, I did mention, and I would always mention, that this little section was kind of a way for Autodesk to have the machine simulation capabilities, right? So this is kind of that was their first step in kind of setting the path for machine simulation. So the first step that you would have to do in order to get that machine in is you're going to go ahead and say select, and then you're going to go ahead and look through the Fusion 360 library, right? So you have recents. If you have a machine inside of this document, you're going to see it in the documents. So very similar to the way that the tool library kind of handles the tools is the way that you're going to see the machines inside of the machine library here. So I'm going to go into document, my machines. If you have cloud machines, local machines, so on and so forth, you're going to see them here. But if you want to see a list of all the machines, this is where you're going to go ahead and select. So I'm going to go into the Haas. I think this NC program is set up for a UMC 750. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of scroll down, and there's that UMC 750. Now you will get a little warning sign, right? So maybe you have a UMC 750, maybe it has different kinematics. You made different changes to it, whatever the case may be. You can only modify machines in your My Machines folder, right? So in order to do that, you would have to copy this machine and then bring it over to either your cloud library or your local library, right? You can't modify machines that are inside of this out of the box Fusion 360 library. So just a word of caution there, right? So again, if your machine kinematics, if you take a look at this UMC 750 and you can see that, okay, maybe the axis, maybe the table is different, which might be an option. Maybe the axis limits are a little bit different on my UMC 750. right? We have additional work holding. We have maybe a different station kind of on the left side. So we changed the limit of the machine. That's where you can go ahead and make a copy of it and then start updating the machine configuration. Now, again, what you're seeing here is strictly just machine configurations. You're not going to get a machine simulation out of this. Now, how do I know? Right, so if you don't see a little icon on the right-hand side, that means that you don't have machine simulation capabilities, right? And this is where a lot of people get confused because they'll go into the machine library, select the machine, and they don't see any machine or any options to turn on machine simulation. So let me go ahead and take a step back. This is what I was talking about, that this has to be kind of the pre-step or your setup in order to get machine simulation to work. The first thing that you have to do is actually go into your preferences, go into preview feature, manufacturer, which this should kind of be give you guys an idea of and I don't want to kind of put words in Autodesk mouth, but in my eyes, this is how I see it. Take a look at how much functionality or preview functionality manufacturer has, right? So you can scroll down quite a bit, and all of these little topics, all of these little checkboxes are things that customers can preview for free, right, inside of Fusion 360. So that should kind of tell you something of where Autodesk is heading with Fusion 360. But anyways, the one that I'm looking for is going to be machine simulation. Again, it's preview functionality. How do I know it's preview? It's got this little green icon. If it was an extension, so this is going to be something that you have to pay for, you will see this little blue icon, right? So even though it's in preview, you still need to have the manufacturing extension enabled in order to get this functionality to work. So not to get confused, right? So not everything in here is going to be a free preview. Some of these are going to be paid for. So machine simulation, machine builder, which to be completely honest with you, I haven't explored as much yet. So this is something that I'll probably try to give you guys some more content on in the future. But this is something that, again, if maybe you don't see your machine or you want to go ahead and build your own machine, this might be something that you guys can take a look at. But again, machine simulation is what we're looking for. We're going to go ahead and apply it, say okay. Let's go back to that setup. Go into the machine section once again, and now you should see these little icons show up on the right hand side, right? So again, what we're looking for is the UMC 750, and now we can go ahead and see that this machine configuration has a machine simulation file or a machine model available, a simulation model available, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select that one. You can see all of the settings here. You can get a nice little preview of what the machine looks like. I'm going to go ahead and say select. The model for this machine must be downloaded before it can be used. That's completely fine. I'm going to download the model. It is going to tell you where you want to store this model, right? And I'm going to go ahead and change it. I think I have one in here already called that. So I'm going to put in AA. And this is where it's going to be up to you, right? Do you want to be a little bit more careful as to where you're storing and downloading your models? Maybe you have a project that's just machine specific. So if you're worried about that, by all means, go ahead and set up your project that way. If not, you can just go ahead and save it with the actual part. I'm going to say save. You do have to give it a little bit of time to load. Right? So this is again, it's going to be a little intensive on the laptop or your workstation, but you do have to give it a little bit of time to load. One thing that I do want to point out is that you now get an additional tab. Right, so this part position, if you don't see this tab when you loaded the machine, something went wrong. So you should see this part position tab available. And now you can go ahead and select where that part is going to be located. Right. So luckily they set up the their work coordinate system exactly to where the actual vise here meets the table. So I don't need to make any changes here. But you can set where your fixture point is at and then where the table attach point. Right. So if you want to connect both points, make them coincident, that's one quick way of doing things. Or if you just want to go ahead and just kind of position them with these triads. right? So for me, I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And there's a machine, right? So there's a machine, there's my part inside of the machine. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and simulate that, I'm going to go ahead and actually simulate. Let's do some 5-axis or some positional toolpaths, right? So I'll do the adaptive and the contour toolpath. They simulate just to show you guys what that looks like. Bring it down a bit. Right, and there's a simulation. So again, full-on machine simulation. This is one of the things, obviously, that helps out programmers a ton, because it always helps out to see exactly how your machine is going to be moving when you're as you're machining some of these parts, right? So that finished. Same exact simulation dialog box, right? So you have info. It'll tell you if you have any collisions. Statistics. It'll tell you the machining time for the operations that you have simulated. So there we are. Again, really, really neat functionality. This is something that, again, is, to my understanding, is free. It is obviously in beta testing, right? So that's something that you guys can check out. And again, feel free to ask some questions if you guys have questions around that. Okay, so let's go back to presentation. Again, we talked about the tools. How do you import tools? How do you import the specific vendor into your library? And then how do you start organizing some of those tool libraries? And then we talked about machine configurations. Again, Autodesk has been adding a lot more machines and machine configurations to the library. So go ahead and feel free, again, give that a look, and then start testing it out with some of your models. All right, and then the last one that we're going to talk about here, so the steep and shallow toolpath. Now, this toolpath is something that is going to be paid for. So this is a part of an extension, but they've actually made some optimizations to the steep and shallow toolpath. And again, if you're worried about surface finish, if you're working with some pretty complicated organic surfaces, chances are you're already using the steep and shallow toolpath, or maybe in the past you've been using a combination of toolpaths to get you something similar to the steep and shallow. Now, if I go into the software and I take a look at the optimization that they did. So what Autodesk did with the steep and shallow, so they actually optimized, or they now have an option to output the optimized perpendicular passes, right? So again, I'll kind of explain what that means. You do have to have a few settings inside of the toolpath itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at the steep and shallow here real quick. All right, so once again, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the links. Probably turn off the leads for this one as well. And so here is the steep and shallow, right? So you can see that some of these areas, on some of the shallow areas here, it's not really doing a great job. It might leave a little bit of extra material here, especially with the cusps. You can see that they're not uniform kind of as it's going up. Right, and then on some of the steeper areas, again, kind of doing something very similar. Right, so how do we make these changes? How do we kind of address some of the issues that we have on these parts? What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and make a duplicate of that steep and shallow toolpath. Control D is the hotkey for that. So I'm going to right click on that toolpath, say edit. By the way, steep and shallow is a 5-axis toolpath, right? So, or a multi-axis toolpath. So if you do have a 5-axis machine, you do have the option to make this a multi-axis toolpath. But anyways, the new updates that we're really concerned with are going to be inside of the passes tab. So again, and now what the actual steep and shallow toolpath is doing is it's taking a look at the surface that it's going to be machining, right? So is it going to be a steep surface? Is it going to be a shallow surface? What's the angle of that surface as the tool is going to go in and machine it? So a little bit more optimization, more calculations that's going on in the background. Now, the first thing that you do have to do is you have to change the threshold angle for this toolpath, right? If you don't know what the threshold angle does, here's kind of a quick kind of screen capture of what it's doing, right? But you have to set the threshold angle to 90 degrees. And then for shallow passes, you have to go ahead and change this one to parallel. Now, here's why we have to do that, right? So when you change that option to parallel, you now have this option for optimized perpendicular passes. Right now, the optimized perpendicular passes should tell you something. It's optimized, right? So that means that it's not going to add perpendicular passes to the entire model. It's going to analyze, it's going to take a look again at the surfaces. If it needs to add a perpendicular pass, it's going to go ahead and add it to that specific section, right? So again, instead of you trying to really find exactly, or maybe start breaking up the toolpath into multiple sections, you can now let the software kind of do that on its own. And that's exactly what I'm going to do, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn on optimize perpendicular passes. Again, the two settings that I changed, or technically three: threshold angle. We changed the shallow passes type to parallel, and then we set this to be optimized perpendicular passes. Right? So we'll go ahead and say okay. Those were the only three changes that I made. Right, and if I take a look at the differences now, we can see that we get a much smoother toolpath, right? So again, it's taking a look at the surface direction, the angle of the surface. And again, this one has some pretty organic surfaces, and it's trying to match the toolpath to the surface that it's trying to machine, right? Instead of just trying to apply in this case, a scallop, right? A scallop toolpath all around this surface. It's trying to really analyze the surface and see, okay, can I add a parallel to this, or what's the angle that I need to machine this specific surface in, and then it's going to go ahead and add it to it. So that's the update that they made. Again, this is something that is going to be a paid for extension. So if you guys need access to something like that, that's something that you can access through the extensions tab. Okay, so that's going to be it. Again, tons of new stuff that has happened in both in August and September, so the 2 months that I was gone. So I'm just getting up to speed on some of the updates, and I'm just on these, I'm kind of blown away with how much functionality Autodesk is adding to Fusion 360. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions now. I thought I said 20-25 minutes. We are way over that now, so I apologize for that. And then let's go ahead and open it up to questions. All right, so we have Jeff here asking a question: do I have to turn off machine simulation to post a file? You shouldn't have to turn that off. So I'm kind of curious to see if you're having like an error message pop up when it comes to posting. But yeah, you shouldn't have to turn off machine simulation in order to post your NC file. All right. So with that, guys, again, give it a couple more seconds, wait for questions to pop up. At the end of this webinar, you are going to see a survey, again, where we're thinking about, and this is, again, don't hold me to this, but we're thinking about possibly combining this with our other AVA date, right? So instead of Fridays, it's going to be Thursdays. And then that's just to kind of give more awareness to some of our other users, right? So kind of mesh both Fusion 360 with some of the other products. Reason being, Fusion 360 is being obviously offered with some of the other tools. So PowerMill, FeatureCam, you now have Fusion with FeatureCam, Fusion with PowerMill. So therefore, that's why we're kind of leaning in that direction instead of just making Fusion 360 its own unique entity. So we're thinking about that. We'll definitely keep you guys updated. You guys should possibly be seeing an email maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe in a couple of months, on which direction we plan on heading. But just wanted to give you guys an FYI that we might be moving these to Thursday. We are still going to be posting them to our YouTube channel. So of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you don't miss any information on Fusion 360. But with that, I don't really see any other questions. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one.